Welcome to this class on Daniel, segment 1. If you do not have the material, just let us know and we'll get you the syllabus and the appendices. This is the class on Daniel, and as I said last week, I've always loved Daniel since a little kid. I loved Daniel in the Lion's Den. As a teenager, I loved the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and I've always been a little overwhelmed with the prophecies in Daniel, and I've always wanted to study it. And this is just a presentation the first time through this. So we'll get started. And this will be recorded, and you're welcome to go back through it afterwards. So if you have a Bible, you can go to Daniel chapter 1, and we'll start in Daniel chapter 1. And if you have your syllabus, you can turn to page 5 of your syllabus. I'm going to be putting all my scripture up on the screen so you can follow it, but also please follow in your Bible too, so you can read it for yourself. And again, I will be using, for the most part, the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, in this presentation. If I use a different version, I will let you know. We'll start in Daniel chapter 1. And my screen locked up. Oh, there we are. Okay. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. That's in Daniel chapter 1. We're in verse 1. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, who had ability for serving in the king's court. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now, among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I can tell you right now that we're not going to get out of the first chapter of Daniel for 3 sessions. Tonight, we are basically going to look at a background, look at some historical background, try and put dates and times and put the whole book of Daniel into a timeline in relation to other verses of scripture. And that'll take up most of the night tonight, is setting this foundational understanding of the time period of the book of Daniel. So here we see in chapter 1 that Nebuchadnezzar came to Babylon, from king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, and he brought with him, besides items from the house of God, he brought some of the sons of Israel, some of the royal family, and of the nobles. And there's many, I think, who think Daniel was part of the the Davidic line. I don't know if that's true or not, but could have been part of the royal family. These were noble children that were brought forth. I don't know how many people were brought with this first exile, but we know at least 4 people that were brought: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, here's a little bit of a map to show you a little bit about what we're talking about. Here on the left is Jerusalem. That is Jerusalem in the land of Israel. And then Babylon is over here. as the crow flies, from Jerusalem to Babylon is about 420 miles across the Arabian desert. Of course, you wouldn't travel across the desert. The way you would travel to Babylon is the reverse way of the way Abraham, who came out of Ur of the Chaldeans, traveled to the land of Canaan. And that is, you would go up to Syria, and then from there you would come down along the Euphrates River and come down into Babylon, which is how they would have been brought forward into the land of Babylon at this time. Now, let's begin to date the book of Daniel. And we'll look at a few key verses to kind of set this for you to understand where Daniel started. And it says here that in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This is in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. Now, if you compare this with Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 2, verse 1 says, now in the 2nd year of King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. So we know from this verse that chapter 2 of Daniel occurs in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. So when he came to Jerusalem to besiege Jerusalem to take Daniel away, it would have been very early in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. In fact, if we compare this with the book of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah prophesies about the 70 years of captivity, in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 1, it says that the word of came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Babylon. That was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So here in Jeremiah, it tells us that the 4th year of Jehoiakim was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. So that's not a contradiction to Daniel. What that tells you very simply is that the reign of Jehoiakim, the 3rd and 4th year of Jehoiakim, overlapped the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. So putting this together, the 1st year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, would have started sometime between the 3rd and the 4th year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. In the 1st year of his reign, of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he besieged Jerusalem. And in the 1st year of his reign, he took some of the vessels from the house of God, along with some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and nobles. And these youths included Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, most historians put the beginning of the reign of this Nebuchadnezzar, there was a Nebuchadnezzar first, this is known as Nebuchadnezzar II, at around 605 BC as the 1st year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this aligns perfectly with what we looked at last week in the orientation from the tablet, the clay tablet known as the late years of Nabopolassar. And that is in your appendix, page 5. And from the lines of the text of the clay tablet of the late years of Nabopolassar, it says that the 21st year, that's the 21st year or the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, which was around 605 to 604 BC, the king of Akkad stayed home while Nebuchadnezzar, his eldest son, the crown prince, mustered the army of Akkad. So this was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, 605 BC. And this is where our timeline for Daniel begins, in 605 BC. And what's really neat about this is the first year of Nebuchadnezzar is the first year of Daniel in captivity. So in the 30th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Daniel would have been there for 30 years. You understand? It makes it really simple. First year of Nebuchadnezzar is the first year that Daniel was in captivity. But this, if you have your timeline on page 8, we'll look at first the part on page 8, the beginning of the timeline of Daniel. The first year of Nebuchadnezzar, also the third year of Jehoiakim, is when Daniel was taken into captivity. It's the first year of Nebuchadnezzar. It's the third year of Jehoiakim, according to Daniel chapter 1. Historically, we understand that the first year of Nebuchadnezzar is 605 BC. So this is when the book of Daniel begins. Historically, on the timeline is 605 BC, is when the book of Daniel starts. Okay, so now when does the book of Daniel end? When is the end of the book of Daniel? The last chapter in chapter 1 is verse 21, which states that Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. This is Cyrus, the king of Persia. And we know from Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, that in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel. The last and final vision in the book of Daniel, in chapters 10, 11, and 12, occurs in the third year of the reign of Cyrus, king of Persia. So we know that Daniel started in captivity in the first year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was there all the way until at least the third year of Cyrus of Persia. Okay, this bookends Daniel. Now, to understand this, most historians date the Persian defeat of the Babylonians in the year 539 BC. However, as we work through this, and when we get into the later chapters of Daniel with the takeover of the Medes and the Persians and Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian, I believe we're going to see that in this, that there was a time from about 539 BC until 535 BC, for 4 years about, in which Darius the Mede ruled in Babylon. And you will see that Babylon was actually defeated by two kingdoms. It was a confederacy of the Medes and the Persians. It wasn't just the Persians. I think then eventually Cyrus took over everything. And we'll see this actually, this is prophesied in Daniel chapter 8. It's really incredible when we get to this. But when Daniel chapter 21 says the first year of Cyrus, it's not the first year that Cyrus started to rule, because historically Cyrus started the Persian Empire in 559 BC, 20 years before he came in to take over Babylon. So I don't think when it says the first year of Cyrus here, that it's talking about the first year of Cyrus reigning over Persia, but rather I think it means the first year that Cyrus ruled over Babylon and over the sons of Israel solely. And I think that was probably 535 BC. Why do I think that? Well, for this, we want to look at the books of Ezra and Jeremiah. So when you put all this together, you'll see how this all fits. The book of Ezra and the book of Jeremiah provide more insight and help identify when the book of Daniel ends. In Ezra chapter 1 through 3, it says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. This would go with what Daniel said, that he continued until the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. He sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. And also put it in writing saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever therefore among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Yahweh, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. According to Ezra 1, they were sent back to Judah in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, and this was according to the word spoken to Jeremiah. So what did Jeremiah say? And you get this from Jeremiah chapter 25, verses 9 and 11 and 12. He said, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, declares Yahweh, and I will send to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, against its inhabitants, against all these nations round about, and I will utterly destroy them and make them a horror, a hissing, and an everlasting desolation. This whole land of Judah will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So they were going to be in Babylon 70 years. Then it will be when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares Yahweh. And then he also, there were two prophecies about the 70 years of captivity. Jeremiah 29, verse 10 says, thus says Yahweh, when the 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and my good word to you and bring you back to this place. So the captivity in Babylon was to be 70 years. Okay. So now going back to our chart, and here you look at the page 9 of the chart, the ending of the chart. If Daniel was taken into captivity in 605 BC, then, therefore, the first year of Cyrus according to Ezra 1, would have had to be 70 years later, right? If you subtract 605 minus 70, that's how I came up with 535 BC is what Daniel is referring to. It's what Ezra is referring to as the first year of Cyrus, the first year that Cyrus was over Babylon, the first year that Cyrus solely was over the nation of Judah. I believe there was about a 4-year span where Darius the Mede had the kingdom of Babylon. And this we'll look at later. Real interesting stuff from the books of Josephus on this. Historians point to the year 539 as the year of the defeat of the Babylonians. This is the time when the Medes and the Persians defeated Babylon, and the kingdom was given to Darius the Mede for a short period of time. Then I believe 4 years later, in 535 BC, Cyrus became sole emperor of the Persian Empire. And this is what Daniel and Ezra refer to when they refer to the first year of Cyrus. 535 BC is when the book of Daniel ends. Or you actually could say the book of Daniel ends in 532 BC, I guess, because we know from Daniel 10 that the last vision in Daniel is in the 3rd year of Cyrus. But the end of the 70 years of captivity is 535. Daniel didn't go back to Judah with everybody else. He was still under in Babylon, or he may have been in Persia at the time. We'll see that later, but that's where Daniel ends. The entire book of Daniel that we're going to look at fits into this timeline. So what that means, and this is pretty significant, especially when we start looking at the prophecies, especially in Daniel chapter 9, where Daniel comes to understand the 70 years. Daniel, the book of Daniel, is the 70 years of captivity. It starts and ends. It is the 70 years of the captivity of Jerusalem. So that also tells you Daniel was there a very, very long time. In fact, I don't know how old he was. I get the idea he was a young teenager. Probably I'd put in my mind 13. I don't know why. That's just because that's when people become a teenager. I get the idea that's about how old Daniel was when he's brought into captivity. If that's true, then 70 years later, he would have been at least 83 years old at the end of the book. So he started there when he was a youth. Maybe he was younger than that. I don't know. Maybe he was older. But it ends when he's an old man. And the book of Daniel fits within this. So now let's look a little more background of Daniel, understanding how it fits with the kings of Judah, what's going on in Jerusalem, and how it fits with the book of Ezekiel. And we'll try and put this together. These verses are in your notes, and you have this to go through later. And these we'll look at 2 Kings. If you have a Bible, you can go to 2 Kings and follow along, or you can follow with me on the screen here. According to 2 Kings 23, verses 36 through 37, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zibdah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Jehoiakim was 25 years. He reigned for 11 years. And when was Daniel taken into captivity? In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. Okay? So Jehoiakim was reigning as king of Judah when Daniel was brought into captivity. So that tells me a few things about Daniel. If he was in the royal family, if he was in the royal household of nobility, he was a little probably aware of Jeremiah the prophet, because this was the heyday of Jeremiah's prophecy during this time of Jehoiakim. So Daniel would have been very aware of the prophet Jeremiah, and when he was a youth and brought into captivity into Judah. 2 Kings 24, 1-6 says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Armenians, bands of Moabite, bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of Yahweh, which he had spoken through his servants, the prophets. Surely at the command of Yahweh, it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood which he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and Yahweh would not forgive. Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that they did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, or Jehoiakim, his son, became king in his place. I'm not sure the pronunciation if it should be Jehoiakim or Jehoiachin, but I do know in some verses Jehoiakim is also called Jeconiah. So if you ever see the king's name Jeconiah, that is also Jehoiakim. So after 11 years, Nebuchadnezzar comes and he takes Jehoiakim out and puts his son Jehoiachin becomes king in the place of Jehoiakim. That Nebuchadnezzar is not part of that yet. So here on the timeline, down here, this is the reign of King Jehoiakim. He reigned 11 years from 608 to 597 BC. And in the 3rd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem, took Daniel and others captive into Babylon in 605, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. The 3rd year of Jehoiakim is the 1st year, okay, the 3rd year of Jehoiakim is the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, which is also the 1st year of Daniel's captivity in 605 BC. All right, that's the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. This is when the book of Daniel starts. 605 BC, 3rd year of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years. The king of Egypt did not come to his land again. If you continue on in 2 Kings 24, verse 7. For the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Neshutah, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that his fathers had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. So this would have been the 2nd time that Nebuchadnezzar came to besiege Jerusalem to carry exiles away. And Jehoiakim went out to the king of Babylon. Wait a minute. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his captains and his officials. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. That's the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, which fits perfectly, right? Because he started to reign in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. Now we're in the 11th year of Jehoiakim. So in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign is when this occurred, which is the 11th year of Jehoiakim. 3 months Jehoiachin has been reigning. So the king took captive him in the 8th year of his reign. He carried out from there all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of Yahweh, just as Yahweh had said. Then he led away into exile all Jerusalem, and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths, none remained except the poorest people of the land. So in this exile in 597 BC, this grand Jehoiachin would have been the grandson of the Davidic line, grandson of Josiah, son of Jehoiakim. He was taken into captivity, and along with him, 10,000 Judeans were taken at this time. This is the second exile into Babylon, which took place in 597 BC. If you continue on in 2 Kings, it says, so he led Jehoiakim away into exile to Babylon. Also the king's mother and the king's wives and his officials and the leading men of the land he led away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. All the men of valor, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths, 1,000, all strong and fit for war, and these the king of Babylon brought into exile to Babylon. Then the king of Babylon made his uncle Mattaniah king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. So Nebuchadnezzar takes Jehoiachin and then makes his uncle, who would have also then been a son of Josiah, who was Jehoiachin's grandfather. He made Zedekiah, Mattaniah king, and then he changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of the Lord, this came about in Jerusalem and Judah until he cast them out of his presence, and Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. This incident about what Jeremiah did here in 597 BC is in your appendix 8 and 9 in the Jerusalem Chronicle, also known as the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle. But because of this account that verifies, that fits perfectly with the biblical record, they call it the Jerusalem Chronicle. And this is what is in the Jerusalem Chronicle. In the 7th year, 598 to 597 BC, which fits perfectly with our timeline, in the month of Kislevu, the king of Akkad, or we could say Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, mustered his troops, marched to the Haiti land, and besieged the city of Judah. And on the 2nd day of the month of Adaru, he seized the city and captured the king. That would have been King Jehoiachin. He appointed there a king of his own choice, which was his uncle, Mattaniah, having received its heavy tribute and sent to Babylon. So this record in the account of the Jerusalem Chronicle on a clay tablet is this account that we're reading about here with Jehoiakim. Really cool stuff. Now, one thing I want to point out, this is an interesting thing, and I think I'll look at this further later on when we look at some of the writings of Josephus on this. But it says Jehoiachin, the son of Judah, in the NASB, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and captains and his officials. The ESV version of the Bible, the English Standard Version, says, and Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants and officials and his palace officials. Josephus speaks actually much better of Jehoiachin than what I read in the scripture. According to Josephus, Jehoiachin, rather than having everybody be killed, surrendered the city to Nebuchadnezzar and gave himself up. He surrendered. It kind of, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Kingdom of Heaven. It kind of reminds me of the end of the movie where the king of Jerusalem, the Salahuddin is going to defeat him, and he surrenders the city of Jerusalem so that everybody can not die, and they're led away. I don't know, that's kind of corny, but that's kind of what happened, is that Jehoiachin gave himself up. He surrendered, and then all these 10,000 people, their lives were saved, but they were brought into captivity into Babylon in 597 BC. Daniel's already there. Daniel's already been there 8 years. This event happens in Jerusalem in 597 BC. And it says in 2 Kings 24:14, I think is amazing. He led away in this exile into Jerusalem, and all the captains, all the men of valor, 10,000 captives. So 10,000 Judeans came into Babylon 8 years after Daniel had been there in 597 BC. Now, one of the people that was part of this 10,000 that was brought into captivity into Babylon is the prophet Ezekiel. The prophet Ezekiel was among the Judeans taken into captivity along with King Jehoiachin. And I mentioned before, Jehoiachin is also Jeconiah in the Bible. The book of Ezekiel takes place at this location in Babylon, where the exiles were brought along the river Chebar. Let me show you this here. They were brought here, the area where the deported Jews were settled just south of Babylon along the Chebar River. This is where these 10,000 Judeans were brought into Babylon. And this is what Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 says. Now it came about in the 30th year. Now in Ezekiel, when he says the 30th year, he's talking about his own age. In his 30th year, I believe this is when you became a priest at 30 years old. Ezekiel became a priest. He's officially became an official priest at this time. And in his 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was by the Chebar River among the exiles in Babylon, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. Now, when did this happen? This happened on the 5th month, in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's exile. The word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and there the hand of the Lord came upon him. So Ezekiel starts prophesying in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's exile. And actually, if you read through the book of Ezekiel, what it uses to chronologically to set the time period for everything, Ezekiel is based on the number of years that Jehoiachin is in exile. So if you ever want to put the book of Ezekiel on a timeline, it's based on Jehoiachin's exile into Babylon. Okay, I know this is a lot, and like I said, you'll probably want to go back and watch this to put this all together. I mean, if you're interested in really locking this into your brain, but this is where they're brought. So 10,000 Judeans. First deportation was in 605 BC. It was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and a few other nobles and people of the royal household. This time in 597 BC is when Jehoiachin and 10,000 Judeans, including Ezekiel, were brought into captivity. And 5 years after being in captivity, Ezekiel begins to prophesy. Daniel's already been there. By the time Ezekiel prophesies, Daniel's already been there 13 years. All right. So, and you'll see in the book of Ezekiel, Daniel already had a reputation among the Judean people. And we'll look at that later, what Ezekiel had to say about Daniel. And this is the Chebar River. So here's what we got. Jehoiakim reigned 11 years from 608 BC to 597 BC. When was Daniel taken in captivity? Third year of Jehoiakim, 605 BC, right? After Jehoiakim was done, his son Jehoiachin reigned for 3 months in 597 BC. He surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar, and he is taken into captivity along with 10,000 Judeans in 597 BC. So then what happens? Now, this is back to Zedekiah, 2 Kings 25. Now in the 9th year of his reign, of Zedekiah, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, camped against it, and built a siege wall all around it. So the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. The city was broken into, and all the men of the war fled by night by the gate between the two walls beside the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. And they went away of the Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from them. They captured the king, brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah. He passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, put out the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him with bronze fetters, and brought him to Babylon. So Zedekiah's seed was all killed. However, God already had provisions, because Jehoiachin, the grandson of Josiah of the Davidic line, the royal line, the Christ line, was already in captivity in Babylon when this takes place. Just kind of gives you an idea of God's wisdom and how all this stuff works. But anyways, Zedekiah is now killed, or taken into captivity. His sons are killed. 2 Kings 25, 8 through 11 says, now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar. This first perfectly, 19 years after 605 BC was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, brings you to 586 BC, which is what all the historians say was the year that the temple was destroyed. It's the year when Judah was finally completely destroyed and taken into captivity, the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile. And this is the final exile of the children of Israel. So now to summation. Again, Jehoiakim reigned from 11 years, from 608 to 597 BC. Third year of Jehoiakim was the first year of Daniel, was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar. That was 605 BC. All right. Then his son Jehoiakim, also known as Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, reigned only 3 months. He surrendered and was taken captive along with 10,000 Judeans into Babylon in 597 BC. Included in that exile was the prophet Ezekiel. And he was taken. Then Nebuchadnezzar took his uncle who was also a son of Josiah, Mattaniah, changed his name to Zedekiah. And then Zedekiah, the uncle of Jehoiachin, son of Josiah, reigned 11 years, 11 more years, from 597 to 586 BC. And in 586 BC, which is the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, which incidentally also is the 19th year of Daniel's captivity. He's already been there 19 years when Jerusalem is destroyed. You understand that? Because he came in the first year of Nebuchadnezzar. So in the he's been there 19 years, and Jerusalem is destroyed and burned with fire. The temple is destroyed; it is no more, and all Judah then is taken into, except for a few people, including Jeremiah, who's still in Jerusalem, and he's still prophesying in Jerusalem. Ezekiel has started to prophesy, and he's been prophesying for 7 years now in Babylon, and Daniel is there. So I just kind of want to give you a scope of what's going on with the children of Israel, the sons of Israel, the nation of Judah, during this time of the book of Daniel. And we'll actually look at more of this later. It's amazing to put these prophecies of Jeremiah with exactly where they happened, when they happened, and what Daniel would have learned. Just incredible stuff. But that's a little bit about those books. Now, a few other things to point out here on this chart from page 8. The book of Jeremiah, just for your reference, the book of Jeremiah spans 66 years. Jeremiah started prophesying in the 13th year of Josiah, or 626 BC. And you'll see that Jeremiah continued prophesying until the 37th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, which is how the book of Jeremiah ends. With the 37th year of Jehoiachin's captivity. So Jeremiah prophesied for 66 years in Jerusalem. Okay? Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel spans from 592 BC, the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, until at least 585 BC. After that time, the book of Ezekiel doesn't really give us reference. It's more just prophecies, the whole end of it. Most of the book of Ezekiel is a 7-year period, from the 7th year, or the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity until the 12th year. For that 7-year period, the book of Ezekiel prophesies in Babylon. While Daniel's there, Ezekiel is in Babylon, and that's where the book of Ezekiel. Daniel is right in the midst of all this. Daniel is taken into captivity in 605 BC. And the book of Daniel spans 70 years, longer than the prophet Jeremiah, longer than the prophet Ezekiel. Daniel is brought in as a youth in 605 BC, and he is there for the full 70 years and gets to see the children of Judah depart and go back to Jerusalem. That's pretty amazing. And that kind of gives you a timeline from the end, the beginning to the end of the book of Daniel that we're going to be looking at, and kind of gets you to see and fit where Jeremiah fits into this and how Ezekiel fits into this. I know that's a lot of information. Again, this will be recorded. You can go over it again on this, but you just need to take time to look at this if you're into chronology. But I like to see everything fit together. I'm amazed how perfectly the scriptures fit, how perfectly the dates fit, how perfectly they fit with history. And it gives me confidence that what Daniel states of future is going to be just as accurate, how beautifully it all fits together. So here's something else in summary of this timeline. In the 3rd year of Jehoiakim is the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is taken into captivity. Now we're going to look at this later from Jeremiah chapter 25, but you will see that right shortly after Daniel is taken into captivity is when Jeremiah prophesies what is recorded in Jeremiah 25. And there is when Jeremiah prophesies that they're going to be in captivity for 70 years. And that is in Jeremiah 25, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, that Jeremiah prophesies about the 70 years of captivity. Then Daniel continues until the 1st year of Cyrus the Persian, the 70 years of Jeremiah chapter 25 is the book of Daniel. So when we get to Daniel chapter 9, and Daniel comes to understand why there's 70 years, what the 70 years is all about, that he is there. He is the 70 years. It's amazing stuff. Anyways, putting all this together is just, I just get thrilled with the perfection of Scripture and how all this fits together. So here's what the Daniel timeline is: the 70 years of captivity, 605 BC through 535 BC. And these two pictures I will use on, I might have some different, but this is my main graphic that I use for my introductory slide for the book of Daniel. And these are both classic artists, hundreds of years old. They're both from Wiki Commons. They're in the public domain, available for download. But I love this, putting these two side by side, because I think they show you, and I think pretty accurately portray, the beginning and the end of Daniel. There on the right, the lower right, this is Daniel in chapter 1 from this artist. What's his name? Otto Adolf Stemmler. I don't know. Anyways, this artist rendering. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. Daniel looks like he's a young teenager there, which is probably about how old he was when he came into captivity into Babylon. He, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, when they were youths in 605 BC. The other picture on the left is Daniel in the lion's den. And this occurred in 539 BC, the 1st year of Darius the Mede, which would have been almost 70 years later, probably about 66 years later, that Daniel is actually in the lion's den. By the time you get to chapter 6, in other words, we've spanned 66 years of Daniel's life. And Daniel, and this I think is a pretty accurate rendering of about how old Daniel was when he's in the lion's den. And I think from these two pictures, you span the book of Daniel, when he's a youth to where he's at the end of the book. And it's at the end of the book, it's amazing, but all those prophecies come in the latter years of Daniel's life, when he really gets the visions about the future. So there's a little introduction to the book of Daniel. Now, I'm going to give you these. Actually, I think, Marianne, I'm going to start adding all these to the end of these in the syllabus. But these are all the verses for review. I'll leave this up here if you want to. These are all in your notes. I think they're all there. Maybe we looked at most of these tonight. We didn't look at 2nd Chronicles. 2nd Chronicles 36:1. That's basically, that is a recap of what's recorded in 2nd Kings, is also recorded in 2nd Chronicles 36. So that's why that's there. We looked at these other verses. We didn't read all of Jeremiah 25. We didn't read all of Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 52, verses 28 through 34, is Jeremiah's account of what's written in 2nd Kings about this time period. So that's the same information written in the book of Jeremiah. And then Ezekiel, or verses with Ezekiel relating to these things. And then the two appendices were, we looked at the late years of Nebuchadnezzar and the Jerusalem Chronicle. I know Sandy asked last week, is there any reading to do? If you want to read up as a review this week, here's plenty to read.